So you have this really versatile weapon. Then on the other hand, you have this, the Takoba, you know, the Sword of the Sahel. Originally a Tuareg blade adopted by many groups all throughout the region. And then you have the Cascara, which is like the Sudanese version of a similar type of design. This sword does not have a developed thrusting point to combat heavy armor. It has a spatula tip. But in the context that the warriors were fighting in this region between North Africa and West Africa, the Sahel, which is a giant arid grassland, with a lot of intermediate terrain and things like that, this is an ideal blade because, one, because of the environment, a lot of people aren't wearing heavy armor, especially the infantry. But what they do have is they have giant shields. And a lot of the sources say that these shields were able to resist most strikes, swords, javelins, spears, whatever. The shield was a very sturdy defense in this type of warfare. And so when I look at the Takoba, my personal theory about it is that this is a sword that is really optimized for sword and shield combat in an armored setting or a light armored setting. Because you have this long blade. This blade is 38 inches long. You have a high point of balance. This one's like 8.5, but they can go as high as 10 to 11.5 inches from the guard. And essentially, this thing turns into a man carver. If you swing this at an unarmed target, you're going to take stuff off. You're going to do a lot of damage. And when you're dealing with a fighting system where most of my body is protected by a large shield, you're looking for gaps within that, impenetrable quote unquote defense. And then when you get those gaps, you want to do as much damage as possible. The arming sword, which is this versatile weapon that's designed to fight unarmored, armored opponents, anything in between. And so it kind of compromises some of its cutting potential for the ability to thrust through, the rings of mail and things like that. I don't think I would necessarily choose that if I was a Sahelian warrior, because half of that versatility is going to things that aren't really a factor for me. The other thing is, because I'm not so focused on that, that having to be able to have the point control, the thrust, and also want to retain, some, maneuverability of the blade or whatever, so I don't, leave myself open. I can create a sword that's more suited for unarmored combat. And so you could say this is not as versatile of a sword, but with its reach, its point of balance, its sharpness, its profile, this is very efficient for where it was designed to be used. And then, and as you look at different cultures, you find a lot of things like that where the more versatile weapon, which is usually the weapon that person is more familiar with, would have disadvantages within different contexts. And so that's the other part of it, is like this void is not, like I said, is not reflective of the real world. The other part of it is that you have situations where the full context of the weapon doesn't make sense outside of its environment. Or, Matt Easton, when he did his video, he used the cutlass versus the saber. And it's like the cutlass, Shad would say, oh, it's not as good as the saber, it's shorter and all this stuff. But it's like the cutlass is designed specifically to be used on ships where you don't have as much space. And so you really need to be careful when you do this, best or worse, or this weapon is better than the other, if you really don't fully understand the cultures you're interacting with or the context that the weapons are being used.